Well, it's a big poster campaign and conference. At the moment it's titled BME Women White Uni. And what we're doing is we're interviewing, or have interviewed in fact, a number of BME students and staff at KCL, and we've kind of collected their experiences and written up transcripts of those interviews and taken photographs of them. And then we're putting those photographs and quotes from those interviews around campus to make those women more transparent. And then we're holding a conference at the end of the month that's a culmination of that poster campaign and is designed to kind of round it off with the conversations about BME women in academia.
Yeah, I had a really interesting genesis actually. So it started a year ago, like this time last year. So we were thinking of ways to apply for funding and get money out of our FU for Black History Month. And so Black History Month, so they allow you to put in like a funding application and ask for money to run certain events. And one of our committee members, Natalie, she was like, you know, it's ridiculous how when you walk outside the Strand, so the Strand campus, but also Virginia Woolf Building, the Franklin Wilkins Building, like most King's buildings, they have pictures of alumni, like famous alumni on the front.
Yeah.
And none of them were, you know, BME women of color, like, you know, none of them were women of color. And it's like, well, there's really no representation of us on campus, at least nothing that's very visible. So you had people of color, but they were predominantly men, and overwhelmingly we just didn't feel like we were being represented in proportion to how many of us actually go to this university. So we decided at first to just kind of put up these posters of famous alumni. And then we ran into all this kind of red tape last year, so we couldn't get access to the archives. The archives told us that they didn't categorize the stuff on the basis of race. We spoke to the alumni office and they were like, yeah, we don't classify our alumni on the basis of race either, or ethnicity, or, you know, country of origin. So it was this huge mess, and then we decided we would just interview the people that we knew, our friends, staff members, the people that we interacted with on a daily basis, like the security guards, the cleaning ladies, you know, all of those people. So we decided to make it more local just because of the kinds of obstacles that we were having in doing what we wanted to do. And then in the meanwhile, so while this was all happening, we realized that what we'd taken on was a huge project. Like, we'd applied for funding for it, but then we didn't have the money or the resources to really interview these people with the time that we needed. Me and Surya, who worked with Sophie on publicity last year, would have to take these huge amounts of time out of our schedules to like, go to other campuses, find people to interview and that kind of thing. So it just became this huge project that we had to keep delaying in terms of logistics and design and that kind of thing. And then we applied for funding with the King's Community Fund. So that was this huge alumni thing where it's like, you have a lot of money. I think you could apply for up to £5,000.
Yeah, it was up to
and you could, you know, do whatever you wanted with it. So we pitched a conference on the basis of the work that we've been doing, because through the course of these interviews we realized how necessary it was. Like, a lot of the BME staff members didn't feel represented at the university, were experiencing professional trouble, and I think it was scary as young students to, like, I mean, I want to be an academic, you know, so seeing that in like your mentors or people that you see on an everyday basis was actually quite inspiring as well as shocking. So we wanted to run a conference on that basis, and then a week later there was this huge thing unveiled on the Strand campus called Meet the Professors, and it was this initiative by the King's Equalities Department to kind of show the fact that, you know, there are women teaching at university, you know, so it was about this Meet the Female Professors basically. It was all of these women and like little bios about them, but all the women were white. There wasn't a single woman of color on that wall.
There was one woman who possibly identified as a woman of color,
but we don't know. I mean,
instance.
Yeah, there was at least no black woman for sure.
Yeah,
no South Asian
absolutely.
woman. I think one might have been Greek, but that was about it.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, no wait, there is actually one woman of color, Malaya Malik, but her picture was tiny and it was at the bottom. So all the big ones were white, and then there were smaller ones at the bottom. Malaya Malik is Pakistani origin, I think. But yes, that was it. And we were in shock because it had just been a week since we'd applied for funding.
And we'd just been having all of these conversations, and then suddenly there was this huge kind of campaign and initiative that was almost the opposite of what we had been thinking of as a society.
Yeah, and it was really shocking. I mean, because these are conversations that, you know, the Equalities Department should have been having. And I mean, it kind of blew up. I think a lot of people took offense, and it wasn't just people who are like normally interested in feminism and race. I mean, I had friends who are like, traditionally who don't really have these conversations, and they think I'm making a big deal when I'm talking about race or feminism. And they were coming up to me going like, "This is ridiculous. There's not a single Indian woman on that wall. There's not a single Chinese woman on that wall. There's not a single, black woman on that wall." So, and then I guess our campaign started to grow momentum. We got given the full funding that we asked for, which was great.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
And then here we are a year later trying to put this stuff together. Absolutely. I mean, it was shocking, but I think I did kind of feel a bit vindicated. I was like, yes, I'm not making this shit up.
And we felt like we were doing something that clearly was important and clearly was necessary for the King's community, because there clearly was something that is so like vital and such a problem that was being completely ignored and passed over by a department that should be, starting initiatives that focus upon these things exactly about women of colour who are being passed over.
The thing is, it is an issue of intersectionality. So it started off about wanting women represented, but then women of colour kind of fell off the back end of that. I think it's interesting because I think there was evidence at some point that they had tried to contact BME women, but BME women weren't very forthcoming with wanting to be featured in that poster campaign, but they were quite forthcoming when we asked them. So I think there's this disconnect.
There's something to do with it kind of coming from an institution and something being sort of grassroots and coming from the ground up definitely seemed to cause a different response in people for some reason. I can't tell you why, but it did. Yeah.
So we've had some really interesting, even conversations that we were having around that time before the official campaign was released by King's. I think it did point to this huge institutional gap in the kinds of resources and support that are provided to women of color at the university. One woman that I spoke to told me about how she was really intelligent, and she's always known she was very intelligent, but she's seen white male colleagues get ahead, because they're given certain kinds of opportunities and mentoring. They're pushed towards certain kinds of things, like, here's a grant, I think you should apply for that. Kinds of small networking things, huge lacunas in the system that aren't really being filled up. So I think we've happened upon this huge body of information, and we have recordings, we have photos, we've got transcribed interviews.
So much evidence of these women feeling marginalised or feeling like there is something lacking in the King's community that needs to be flagged up.
But it's interesting because at least for me, it did point out kinds of limitations that you have when you're doing this kind of work. So when you put out a call saying we want women of colour to talk about their experiences, there are only a certain kind of woman that's going to come forward. Does that make sense? Women of colour who don't really see race or avoid bringing their race up in professional institutional settings, who are uncomfortable being seen in this way, aren't going to put themselves forward. So there's, I think, a bit of a gap.
Yeah, definitely when I've been organising this conference and I've been speaking to different women who I'm trying to get involved, there have been some women who, I had a kind of carefully worded email that I put out to the whole committee, and we all decided on how I was going to phrase things when I sent the email out, because it's a very sensitive issue for some women. And there were lots of women who kind of took issue with some of the phrases that I'd used. One phrase in particular was BME women and their struggles in academia, and I think a lot of women were saying, well, by that phrase are you trying to imply that BME women can't get ahead? And I was like, of course not, but what I'm trying to talk about is the fact that some women do feel marginalised because of their race and gender together, and a lot of women felt that was something that they felt really sensitive about and actually didn't really want to talk about on a public platform, but at the same time said that they'd like to come along to the conference to hear other women's experiences and hear if they match their own too. So clearly it kind of struck a chord with some people.
Yeah, I think these conversations are kind of proliferating just outside of our small circle. So we started this a year ago, but since I've been to conferences where you've had black women academics present academic papers on, say, negotiating racial economies in the workplace, and how they've been institutionally kind of punished when we talked about race, they'd be put into offices with no windows and that kind of thing. So, these conversations are happening on a huge scale now, in a way at least that I didn't really see them happening a year ago. So I think that's progress as it is.
Yeah.
Really. But I mean, there's also, I think, several kind of class issues that come into this. I think academics might feel more comfortable or like at least less threatened by their employers when they talk about these things. I think we interviewed an anonymous food lady at the Waterloo campus. So she, like one of the lunch ladies, and she refused to go on the record with her name. And even then, I mean, there's very much the sense that you can't really speak out against your employer on like that kind of contract basis. She refused to be photographed, that kind of thing. So their interaction with students is much more like controlled. They have like targets that they have to meet and that kind of thing, feedback reports that they have to get. Like, so it's very, very difficult, I think, to really obtain any kind of true, authentic picture of what's happening. And I think we're very aware of those kinds of limitations.
Yeah,
in our
absolutely. So the posters are going up on the 12th of October, and then the conference itself is taking place on Saturday the 31st of October, which I appreciate is Halloween, but it was the only day we could get the room we wanted. Yeah, hopefully that's what people are going to think. But we've got 4 really amazing panels. We've got a kind of general introductory panel about being a woman in academia. We've got being a woman in the arts panel, a being a woman in tech panel, and a panel entitled Being a Woman in the Body and Institutions. And so all the panels are going to be about kind of how women of colour navigate those arenas and their own, the women on the panel's own experiences. And I've tried to kind of get women with a breadth of experience in the field. So, for example, on the arts panel we have Iyer Richards, who obviously directs the Shows of Noir campaign, organisation. But we've also got a composer, Dr. Shirley Thompson, who works at Westminster, and film director Cecilia Mike is coming as well. So we've got kind of women who work in different fields of the arts to come forward and talk about their own experiences and their own experiences in their separate fields, and sort of what being diverse and being of colour brings to those things as well.
And we're doing workshops on the side, so we're doing one on why is my curriculum white, and we're doing one which is like filmmaking, I think.
Yeah, so it's a craftivism workshop, so we're having some members of the union come in to help people kind of make tangible pieces of art that kind of allow people to kind of produce something through activism. So it's not all just like speech and people speaking about experiences, but people actually kind of creating something out of their own experiences. And we're hoping, if we get a chance, to display that somewhere in the student union after the conference as well.
Yeah, I think for me a big issue with panel discussions is often how like tiring they can be, because you're doing like 5 panels a day, you get exhausted by the end. I get really restless halfway, so we're trying to put some other things in there for people to kind of go off into, or just leave if they feel like going away for about half an hour. It's because I feel the more breaks that you get from it, the more you probably absorb the ones that you actually do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and we've tried to make it kind of as varied as possible. We held a focus group back in, I think it was maybe February.
God, yeah, it was so long ago.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, and so we sort of brought together different groups of people who had been involved in kind of feminism and sort of similar issues with race and stuff at King's, and everyone sat down and spoke about what they felt was really important. And tech actually came up as one of the really, really big things. So at the moment we've got a couple of women who either work in tech or teach in digital technologies and things like that, coming to speak about their experiences as being women working in those fields. So that's quite exciting.
Yeah, what was interesting at least when we started this is that we were largely humanities or social sciences students doing this work, but a lot of the BME women that we were finding were actually based in things like psychology, psychotherapy, counseling, that kind of thing, or like in health or in tech. So trying to actually broaden our own horizons is definitely good.
Yeah, lots of women at the IOPPM, which is the Psychiatry Institute at King's. A lot of women of colour working there as well.
Yeah. Or like at least the ones that were forthcoming. And
yeah, precisely. Yeah.
And that call was put out about a year ago now.
Yeah, a long time ago. So things might have even shifted since then.